all of the landowners who were diverging these streams. Only the divergences are only used. I think only one of them is currently actively used on the agricultural land. The other two, the land that they were diverging the streams from, is no longer being used for agriculture. It's kind of just sitting there, like much of the land on Rota is just sitting its own. It's not being actively tilled or anything. I think it's a big question to be asking ourselves is the role that these divergent structures have and how much water they're taking away and how much impact they really are having on the stream ecology. Because on the map that I had of how far the streams were receding, one of the main divergent structure, which is really old, it's very large. When you drive over it on road, it looks like a stream in and of itself. It actually was still flowing even when the rest of the stream had gone dry because the divergence was so high up throughout that sub-watershed. And so that's one of the questions that I've been trying to ask, which is whether or not there's a need for us to keep those structures in place and really to kind of make sure that when we're thinking about management, that's actually incorporated within the new management plan. The old conservation action plan didn't even mention the fact that there were these structures, even though yourself and many of us who have gone out in the watershed, it's been there for a really long time. So I think the landowners are aware of it, the stream ecology is aware of it, and I'm hoping that our future management team can really make sure that they're either incorporated or we find a way to remanage those things. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Malcolm. All right. So we are going to now switch over to our next speaker, Christine Fejeran from Guam Forestry.
Manana Sizuos, everyone. I do not do well with podiums. I like to move around, but I was told I have to stay here. I will do my best. So, from the Department of Agriculture, Guam Forestry and Soil Resources Division, welcome. Let's get started. I manage the Cooperative Fire Protection Program, just for the sake of background info. A quick overview. It's so quick, we're going to flip right through it for the sake of time. I'm going to cover historical background on fires on Guam, the overall story, where we were, where we're going, and real quickly touch on some of the climatic changes that we are seeing and how that's affecting our fire regime out there. So what's going on the ground and what's going to happen in the future. I have that crystal ball, I can tell you. But I always start with the Guam Forestry mission. It's to promote, protect, and enhance our natural resources and sustain those. I think it's an environment. But you get me. This is a tall order that we are all, in one way or another, we're addressing through all of our work and our research and partnerships. So all the work that forestry does, there aren't any other organizations that are doing the scale that we move at. But we are also successful because we have the research that's taking place, we have the partners on the ground with us, and it's a collaborative team effort that gets us going and moves us in the right direction for support. Our conservation areas, just quickly to recap, are the Coastal Conservation Area. This is where we have more focus. We have years of effort and work in the Coastal Conservation Area. This is the field trip site that Guam Forestry will be leading you on. It is about a 500 acre footprint, and forestry work has been on this site for about 40 years at this point. So you're going to be visiting a site and seeing forestry practices that were implemented 30, 40 years ago, and what's taking place today, and how we are converting that forest stand to a native stand. It's also an area that we protect from fire regularly. And we'll cover that. Bolanas Conservation Area and On are areas that we have minimal impact on right now, meaning minimal management practices at these sites, but we're working towards that. Manel Gayas Watershed Restoration Project is Guam Forestry's first landscape scale restoration project. This is huge. It's a 3-year project, and I believe Adrian's going to cover this, so we won't steal her thunder. Maso Reservoir, Seti Bay, and Dono. Dono Island also has forestry management practices on the ground. We have 4 programs. It's the Urban and Community Forestry Program, Forest Stewardship, Cooperative Forest Health, sorry Rudy, and Cooperative Fire Protection. And together we make up the management team for the resources on island. Land ownership, this is really important that we cover it real quick. It's so that for all of you off-island guests, there's a very distinct division, right? We have private and government lands. Government lands are broken up even further to federal, the Department of Defense properties or federal properties, and the Government of Guam properties. You'll note that the federal government owns approximately 30% of the island. That's a lot. Let's get started. Let's cover some of the history. This is where it's hard because fire is dynamic. We don't, we move around. Do I have to stay at the mic? Okay. I'm sorry, Arlene. Okay, so when we talk about the fire story in history, these articles go back about, let's see, I think the earliest one I have on the screen is from 1979, so not too far back, but from 1979 to the late 80s. Is that what this thing is? Okay, here we go. So these articles hit on topics that you might see today. Do these look familiar to you? Wildland fires hit record high. I think that one was 1979. We have welcome back rain. Sorry. Guam's wildland fires caused by arsonists. Guam foresters going after arsonists. This is not news. This is nothing new. I mean, it is news. It's nothing new. That being said, if we had Smokey Bear outreach presentations, which were extremely effective for the sake of children. I grew up knowing Smokey Bear, only you can prevent forest fires. Who can tell me what Smokey says today? Okay, I'll tell you. Only you can prevent wildfires. So even his tagline, his message has shifted with the times and across jurisdictions. Because we may not have these huge forest canopies and stands that you see in other jurisdictions, but we have these, unfortunately, we'll say man-made savannas, human-caused fires. And that's another little fact for all of you to take away. Guam's fires, all of our wildland fires are caused by people. Whether they're intentional settings, accidental escaped backyard fires, or arson for the sake of arson, which is an intentional setting and malicious setting. That's our history. That's what we're dealing with today. And that's what we're going to continue to have to educate and respond to until we can start getting strong enforcement and investigations. So Guam Forestry is working on bringing back the Wildland Fire Investigation Team. So I coordinate that. Our team, we all coordinate that with the U.S. Forest Service, so you'll see that in future. And shortly, we will have wildland fire recruit trainings for volunteers, so that's another one. I moved off topic. Where are we at? Wildland fires hit record highs. Let's go. This is what it looks like on Guam. You might assume that this fire started from the roadway, but Guam is covered from north to south by a network of trails. So majority of our fires, the higher percentage would be fires started inland, either right behind a house and escaped out into that interface. We have the wildland-urban interface, so right behind a home, right into the wildland, or it was a fire intentionally set on a trail. And this could be a foot trail, a UTV, ATV trail, a dirt road. So we do have fires started from the main road, but majority of the time you see them coming from the grasslands, working their way to the road, which becomes the fire break if we're lucky. But majority of the time, for all of us who fight fire, and that's my crew, that's our crew back there. Thank you guys for all your work. So we have two primary responders when it comes to fires on Guam. It's the Guam Fire Department and the Forestry Fire Team. Guam Fire Department, I heard their fire chief describe it like this once, and I was very happy to hear it. He said the Guam Fire Department takes the defensible stand against wildland fires. We defend community, property, right, life, and assets. The Guam Forestry team takes the offensive. They go for the head of the fire. They work to stop the movement of that fire, right? And I found that very appropriate because that's what happens. We have this wonderful team that stands by and guards the community, and we have forestry in the jungle, and people they rarely see us. They don't really know we're there. We're that stealthy, but the fire goes out and we go home. I'm sorry, I know this came out small, but the graph that you're seeing in front of you is now going to introduce us to the concept of now weather. How are our seasons affecting our fire story? What's happening on the ground? And with climate change, longer wet seasons or longer dry seasons, we're starting to see that over time, our fires are not actually, number and size of fires aren't actually decreasing. And when we look at a graph that's been shared widely across the Pacific, so many of you may have already seen this graph. It's from Clay Trowernic with the Pacific Fire Exchange. Clay has shared this with me. He shared this with me years ago when we started working together. And the graph today is still stands as is, so it's still correct today. This is a graph that depicts right here. Oops, right here. We're winning! It's amazing. We are winning. This is deplorable. If you can't see the small print, it's basically illustrating that the percentage of land across the continental US, or the western US, Hawaii, Palau, and Guam, that Guam still burns more land area in percentage than all of the other jurisdictions. So when we say fire has a devastating impact on our island, the use of fire for any purpose now in management or in control of vegetation, we really need to look at that and tear that apart. We need to understand that when we use fire on Guam, and I say, oh my God, 2 minutes? Nowhere close. Okay, let's just skip this slide because I'm going to cover it with everything else. Holy crap. Okay, let's go into stats. Statistics. Annually, Guam burns about 3% of the island annually. This is going back 30, 40 years worth of data. And that's huge. You can see here in the south, and many of us know that the south, because of those grasslands, we have more wildland fires going through those areas. And you can see the years between, the color codes are between 2016, 17, and 18. And where you can see them overlap, the same areas are burning over and over. So areas that didn't burn the year before, it's just burning right around that to the older vegetation that wasn't touched the previous year. So between the years, all the fire data we've collected over the years, we know that the average is about 3%. I wanted to illustrate, I'm going to skip this slide and go to this one. For this data, not to hit you with a bunch of numbers and graphs, but for this data, I want you to see that for 16, 17, and 18, and everywhere in between, where you had these high peaks of fire, this is the fire table, total acres burned per year, and this is over that 30-year period. And then we have down here the total precipitation for those years. You will note that you have, I don't have great graphics, so this is as good as it gets. But you have where there's a high peak in fire, low drop in precipitation. But don't stop there. Look to the previous year. Higher peak in precipitation. What's that tell us, terrestrial people? What's happening out there? Things are growing. Yeah, we love that. We love that. And I don't mean to be sarcastic about it. But when we turn that positive into the, oh no, now what? Because for the fire managers, it turns into now we have more fuel on the ground. Because the minute that dry season hits and we see the drop in precipitation the following year, now we have a lot more new fuel drying up and ready to burn. And so we get these high peaks. Forestry, if you didn't know, we do manage the conservation areas. We have fuel load reduction projects, and it's question time. We have fuel load reduction projects that we go out and we cut fire breaks around our conservation areas. So we're still looking for more funding. I'm still reaching out to my funders to get more funding to support the pre-fire, mitigation. The outreach is increasing. There are PSAs out there now for the public. But because I have to wrap it up, I'm so sorry. Long story short, the fire situation out there, it hasn't exactly dropped. But perhaps the community's acceptance of understanding that when we talked wildfire in the 70s, great messages, good outreach, perhaps our community wasn't quite ready to absorb that information and act upon that. These current years, we're seeing more partners come to the table, talk about fire, address wildfire, address land concerns. And through that effort, I think we have fostered a community that's more accepting. These service learning opportunities have increased that dialogue. So what am I saying? When it comes to the outreach messaging, there wasn't a bad concept in the past. It just was the community ready to hear that and move forward with it. And I think we're in that position now. Questions? I'm sorry. I had a lot of slides. I can't do 12 minutes. I'm sorry, Huldra.
It's okay. You have a few minutes for questions while we switch over the.
Okay, how about we just do this?
And
I'm gonna need the computer.
the microphone is right back here. Oh no, on each side. Any